I would like to introduce Matt Ringel, who will be presenting Whiteboarding 101. Matt has been presenting at Nano conference probably 10-15 times, right? So welcome back, Matt. It's a pleasure to have you back with us again. Stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So before we begin, so I'll take the test pattern off the whiteboard. What you'll see soon, right, excellent. So as you've noticed, no slides. The only slides I get are my speaker notes. The talk is entirely me, a whiteboard, a bunch of markers, and my sense of style. So here's what we're going to be doing. First, I'm going to ask all of you to move up. This is not the Blue Man Group. There is no splash zone. You will not be offered ponchos. And I promise you there is no protection afforded by sitting in the back of the room. Please move forward. This is a talk about getting to know people. If you're stuck on your laptop, I understand. Just know I'm keeping track. Come on up. Okay, great. So while y'all are doing that, all y'all, sorry. This, as it says on the tin, is Whiteboarding 101. I am your host, speaker, somebody, Matt Ringel. Why am I up here? I've done this talk for a bit, but more importantly, I've spent a lot of time in basically getting ideas into people's heads. And that includes doing professional services, that includes being adjacent to sales, that includes internal engagements, external engagements. I've thought a lot over time about what it means to give a whiteboard talk. And so that's where we're starting today. A little bit of administrative stuff before we go on. So this talk is 90 minutes. At roughly the halfway point, depending upon where we hit a break, I'm going to give you a 5-minute break so you can check your phones, as you all are doing right now. So you can check your phones, that's your cue, and do whatever you need to do outside, come back in, and then we'll start, and we'll do a mini halftime Q&A, so you can ask any catch-up questions right there, and then we'll go through the rest and have a full Q&A at the end. So I would ask that you hold your questions until both of those. And we'll work from there. If it's something really, really urgent, please stand up, but I'm going to be really interested to know what your question is. So, without further ado, let us begin. So, what are whiteboard talks? Yes, me talking at a whiteboard. You're all very smart. But the interesting thing about a whiteboard talk is that it happens in real time, right? It's me drawing on a board and talking to you and thinking about what I'm going to say next and writing pictures on there and trying to figure out what my next speech is while you're trying to learn while absorbing what's on that board to supplement whatever I'm saying to figure out what's going on. It's much more dynamic than a slide presentation. Everything has its place. Whiteboards are a fundamentally different medium. One of the things that we will go through, there will be a brief section on, well, what if I'm not on a whiteboard? What if I'm on Zoom and I have a graphics tablet? We're totally going to talk about that. Scout's honor. Scout's honor. So, what is a whiteboard talk? Whiteboard talks are one of the key ways that engineers can communicate structured information with colleagues. You need, by having a picture up on the board, you get a chance to take a look at, you get a chance to say what you're saying and have them associate it with a picture that gives them a way to organize things. And there's a whole bunch of shorthand to do that. Promise you, there's a lot to cover. It's a combination of teaching, storytelling, there are stories, you have been warned, and improvisation. Not everything I say up here is going to be in there, or even the supplemental notes I took 15 minutes ago. There might be other things I relate to you, but it's never going to be a rambling cocktail conversation. It's still going to fit into the framework of the talk, because this talk has been rehearsed, and there is a framework for the talk. So, What are you going to learn? What do I hope against hope that you walk out of here with? And that is how to structure a whiteboard talk, how to think about how you want to present it, how to narrow down the topic scope a little bit, how to adapt to different audiences, and how to control the conversation. That last one sounds a little creepy, I know, but what I mean by it is how do we, if you feel like you're losing the audience, well, what does that mean? That can mean many things. If someone is being disruptive, if you can't actually get somebody to walk them out the door, what can you do to kind of bring attention back to you? And so there will be a couple of Jedi mind tricks in there. I'm leaving those for last because that's kind of the funny part, really. Not that all of this is really serious, but here we are. So a few assertions. Like I said, this is all real time. You might notice, one thing I just did, and I've done for the past 5 minutes, even when I'm writing on the board, I'm talking with you. Because nothing is more boring, and we've all been to school, we know how this goes, nothing is more boring than the teacher just kind of drawing up there for a while, drawing the thing, while you're just kind of waiting them for them to be done doing what they're doing. The idea is there has to be constant engagement. It's kind of like radio. If there's ever dead air on radio, something is horribly wrong. The fact that it happens so rarely is how bad it is that it happens. Other things about humans. People absorb information through narrative, right? This is all about storytelling. We've all heard about, well, hey, here's how you hunt the mammoth in the cave. But that's how humans do what we do. We tell stories, these associative engines in our head, link them together, and between all of them, we come up with a story that allows us to hang several concepts on it, that allows us to take this, what would ordinarily be fairly disjoint data, and stick it together into meaning something useful. And that could be a story about port striping on ASICs and switches. This could be a story about any number of things. But it is also a story about how do you get people to get blocks of information and have them stick. And it's also visual organization. Now, what does that mean? Visual organization is literally, I'm writing something on the board, and I'm talking with you, so we're having a little journey through time here, 1 second per second, it's pretty great. And we have a journey in space. Whether I write something at this corner of the board, or this corner of the board, or this corner of the board, means something depending upon what I'm writing and the context I'm writing it in. And so you get to organize your story in both time and space. How do you want to tell it? And how do you want to show it on a board? So whiteboards equal narrative plus visual organization. So let's get right into talking about how you set up your topic. And specifically, the word I'm going to look for here is boundaries. It's always good to have good boundaries. I've been told that. What does boundaries mean? So we talked about time and space. Let's talk about time and space. I just drew this line on the blackboard. This means I'm about to draw a graph of some kind. You all know that. You have already bought into that. You know what it's going to be. Why? Because we're at a networking conference, and that's what you do with this thing. Likewise, if I do that, you know that's time, and you know it's going forward. And I'll get back to all that in a second, but right now, let's just say abstraction. What we're going to count here on the y-axis is abstraction. What is the level of abstraction you're giving your talk at? So for example, horizontal boundaries represent the amount of time you have, right? Giving a talk in a 15-minute lightning talk is different than giving a talk in 45 minutes, giving a talk in 90 minutes, or giving an elevator pitch. So how much time do you have, which will govern what you're able to talk about. But the other things are the vertical boundaries. This vertical boundary level is the level of abstraction at which you intend to give your talk. For example, if I'm giving a talk about overall trends in the networking industry, right, that's going to be a pretty high level of abstraction. I'm not going to go very deep into any one person's hardware. It's a survey. I'm going to be talking about different companies, different overall technologies, how the technology landscape is evolving over time, and so on. If it's a deep tech talk on one particular ASIC architecture, on one particular family of switches, or even a single switch, that's a very low level of abstraction. It's going to be very deep, not very broad. I'm not being able to talk about much, but I'm going to be talking about whatever I talk about in an excruciating level of detail. Also completely valid. So you can imagine, over time, don't wipe the board with your hands, the oils get all over it. Just don't bother, don't do that. I didn't do that. So over time, you're giving this talk, and the abstraction will wobble a little bit because any subject will. That's just true. But one of the quick things to look for is, do you break out in either direction during the talk? If you break out too high, well, now you're in a tech talk where people are kind of, okay, going to absorb really, really nitty-gritty details, and now they're talking about something that they're just going to ignore because this is not what they came here for. They're going to start looking at their phones, their laptops, whatever, because they're not learning what they were supposed to be learning by coming here. Break out too low, and now you've got yourself into the weeds. We are all nerds. We all get ourselves into the weeds during talks. That is what we do. I have met us. But that also means that people will ignore you because they're not coming here what they came here to learn. Nobody cares about the specific details of how you're going to frob the Framistan when you use the gizmo and the wackadoodle. Instead, they wanted to talk about the overall frobbing Framistan market, or possibly the theory of Framistanic thinking. All of these are true. So go too low, and they're like, I did not need to know about the Type 5 Framistan, nor the Type 6A frobbing that I needed to do to it. Up here, it turns into the, how am I going to operate my network? How am I going to operate my network while knowing that there is actually threat to the Framistan market? Like, how am I going to do that, right? So I would like to thank Don Martin of Mad Magazine for Framistan. So the idea is make sure that you're keeping a level of abstraction. It's also a question you can ask in your head on a regular basis. Just during the talk, check in with yourself. Every few minutes, am I going too high? Am I going too low? Have I got stuck in the weeds? Am I going too fluffy? What's going on here? And then you can just bring it back. And you don't have to tell anybody. That's the great part, right? This is all in your head. You can just gently steer the talk back. If you went way too far, yeah, you could say, oh, my bad, I really love this stuff, and then go back to it. And people will say that you have a passion for the subject. And that's great too, right? So, moving on. You can cover for that, but ask yourself repeatedly when you're doing it. Tech people want data. A technical talk wants data. A talk for managers is going to be about strategy. Executives want ideas. Think of those, data, strategy, ideas. What are you trying to deliver? So, a couple of comments about your tools. First, you've got a whiteboard. This is a standard 4x6 whiteboard. It's kind of nice. I like it. 3x5 whiteboards are fine too. But the important thing is markers. Right? These markers were tested before I got on this stage. There's a little test pattern up there. Always check your markers before you get up on stage. I can't tell you how many times, because I don't actually remember, how many times I actually had to run out to Staples or whatever to get another set of markers before a talk. And now I just tell people, can you please get me a set of markers? And it works out okay. But know your tools. Also, you think Sharpies dry out fast. These things dry out super fast because they're basically pigmented solvent. That's why whiteboards work. If you're going to always cap your markers, if you leave your marker open for more than about 5 seconds, that's bad. Realistically, 5 seconds isn't bad, but that means you don't leave it open for 10 seconds. At 30 seconds, it's going to start malfunctioning. 5 minutes, and you're going to have to dunk it in water to get it going again. Please don't do that. Always cap your markers. And what we're talking about when we're talking about tools is, I mentioned like Zoom and telecom conferences. So talking about a graphics tablet. So a lot of people are like, hey, I can just use a graphics tablet on the virtual whiteboard, and that's good. And there are plenty of ways to do that, and that's just a good thing to do when you can't get to an actual whiteboard or a whiteboard won't actually show up. Same visual storytelling approach. But it is a different tool, and you have to learn how to use it differently. For example, well, I'm not asking you all to do this right now. Try to write on a lined piece of paper while having your eyes closed. Just try to write a sentence, not like a single word, but like a sentence, maybe 2, writing your eyes closed. And you will notice that this becomes a mess very quickly, unless you have practiced. And the reason is because our eyes give us constant feedback as to how to write and to writing on the page. You get constant visual feedback. And so that's how you're able to keep between the lines while you're writing, as opposed to anything else. You will find that if you try to look at the screen of whatever you're doing while you're on the graphics tablet over here, it will not be great if you're trying to do it without practice. If you have a graphics tablet, practice writing alphabet on it. Make sure your writing's legible. Make sure that your hand isn't canted over at an angle while you're writing, so you don't end up with parallelograms where you'd end up with rectangles. Okay? And that's what I'm going to say about that. So now I want to talk about the first of the Jedi mind tricks. Framing a discussion. So I already gave you a little preview, right? We talked about the Cartesian graph, right? Okay, there's an x-axis and a y-axis, and we know that one's going to go forward in this way, and there's a dependent and independent variable because this is the way these things go. But let me give you one that's actually a little cooler. So how many of you are familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant? Raise your hand. Or this kind of like there's good and there's bad and there's things in the middle, right? Most people know this stuff, especially in our field. But the fun part about this little doohickey is that I get you to buy into about 8 different things if you're willing to say, I'm drawing that on the board and I know that's a Gartner Magic Quadrant. Let's count them off. 1, there are 2 variables. And only those 2 matter. There are 2 states for each of those variables. And each of those states is different enough, so like, bad, good, purple, fuchsia. Okay? There are 2 variables. They are not necessarily continuous. Purple and fuchsia aren't continuous, last time I checked. You can choose a scale, but work with me. There are 2 states for each of those, and each of those states is distinct. Each of these states is the only ones that matter. Those are the only ones that matter. And on top of that, we know that the universe of what we're talking about can be broken down into 4 distinct separate states. that are the only ones that matter for purposes of this discussion. So you can see, I have now narrowed down this conversation that we're about to have about good, bad, and purple and fuchsia to discrete variables that are distinct from each other and that are distinct in each of the variables. Each of those variables has a different setting, et cetera, and probably, this one's a little bit iffy, there might be one good state, one bad state, and two neutral states. Good, bad, and neutral. So when we do this, like I have, by just drawing the Gartner Magic Quadrant up there, whatever you want to call it, I've activated a bunch of stuff that's already in your head to talk about what I'm going to talk about next. Now, there are a few other examples that I love giving. For example, got a number line. A number line means that there are typically several discrete states, and that those discrete states are the important ones. And that anything between them, these are important, anything between them is a notable exception and meant to be talked about. And you'll see that when you see that flow of conversation when someone draws up a number line. Similarly, another graph, if I draw a bell curve, you all know roughly what I'm talking about. There's a normal distribution. You can probably put sigmas to it if you really wanted. This is the and there is a reason, which hopefully the speaker will get to, why this thing ends up having a normal distribution. But this also goes for power laws. This also goes for power laws. It goes for log distributions. Your hockey stick curve is an example, right? Every picture, if someone drew a hockey stick curve up, right? If someone, to the moon, if someone drew that kind of thing up there, you would know they were talking about, hey, yeah, we're starting out slow, but we're going to have exponential growth, and so that means you should invest us, or whatever, right? But this is all information that I don't have to say out loud. I can just draw the picture up there. It all registers in your head, you internalize it, and therefore I can continue. So why is this all important? I mean, it's cool. It's a cool little Jedi mind trick, but why is it important? And the answer is because you get to assert the problem. Specifically, you want people that you're having this discussion with to see the problem the way you do. Not that your way is the truth or the way or the light or whatever, right? But it is your vision of the problem. And therefore, you want to, as quickly as possible, without people getting too bogged down in whatever they're getting bogged down in, get to the point where they can say, okay, I get you, I see why this is a problem, let's actually figure out what's going on. Now, there are a few ways to do this. One, you can use pictures, and that's good. But part of it is your talk is a story, right? Stories have, there's the original state, and then there's rising action, and then a conflict, and then maybe climax, and then denouement, and there you go. That is, oh look, another graph. That is a story. And so you come up, you set the talk. You now get to say, okay, I've set the scene for the story, I've given you enough context by using pictures and everything else. We rise through the action, we get to the point where we go deeper into it, and I possibly tell you something slightly unexpected you may not have known about the topic. And then we go up, and we hit a conflict, we hit a thing where, well, if this is true, how can this be true? I'm about to tell you, and you came here to find out. That's right. And after that, you hit the climax, you hit the solution. By the way, here's how we're going to get it done, and here's why you want to do it this way. Everybody claps, and then at the end, it's like, thank you. And at the end of it, the denouement is very much a, thank you for listening, here's how we're going to get this done, you know how to contact us, do you have any questions? Yes, we've thought about these other things, et cetera, et cetera. You're kind of tying up loose ends and cleaning things up. But in the end, this is all the shape of a story. And so when you deliver a talk, if it's about a solution, think about it that way, right? You set context, you kind of build the action to a point, you understand, something unexpected happens, there is a thing where you actually have to make a decision about how we're going to solve this, you present the solution, then present the details. Thank you all for coming. That's not what I meant here. But because the thing about offering a solution is that it allows you to guide the discussion. Once again, you're shrinking the universe down of what you wanted to talk about so that you can keep people focused on the things you want to talk about. Because you came in with a goal. When you're up here, you came in with a goal of what you wanted people to walk out of here with. If you set up an initial point of reference and you set up a solution, you have now anchored people to that solution. It's kind of like price anchoring. If you've ever seen this, the idea of like, I'll give that to you for $15. And if you buy into that, well, now all negotiations start at $15. It's worth at least that. And then you start, but even if you get them down, you've started at the price they've started with. Similar here. If you state the solution and state what's going on, they will be able to anchor themselves to what you're talking about. Let me give you a couple of very, very specific solutions. Very, very specific examples very quickly. Enterprises are moving to the cloud. Well, there's no discussion about cloud migration. Of course they're moving to the cloud. Why? I said they were moving to the cloud. I mean, people are going to stand up and say, enterprises are not moving to the cloud. They're moving away from the cloud. Maybe. Maybe they won't. But in the end, it's something that you can say that is obvious that people can work with, that is vague enough that people aren't going to argue with it too much. There are 4 fundamental types of bots or scrapers. Behavior can, much like the Foursquare, behavior can be organized, and there are only a handful of real differences in approaches that we care about. An error occurred. Mistakes were made. Right? That standard passive voice thing. Well, but there's a use to that, right? You want to focus, and this is something that happens, you want to focus, like for example, an incident response, you want to focus it on the error, not who caused it, right? An error was caused by such and such doing the thing. Like, well, now we're talking about how such and such is not such a nice person. Or maybe they were misguided or whatever, who knows. But you want to focus the discussion on the error. Therefore, you leave the subject out of it entirely. And now you frame the discussion, kind of blameless reviews, et cetera, around the error itself by removing the subject from consideration. So the next thing I want to talk about, this is actually a brief note, but it's actually kind of fun. That's kind of why I give this talk, is talking about color. Different types of colors and why you use them. So they're useful for framing. People have different things ahead. Red could be, red is an X, green is a check. Things are bad, things are good, what have you. It would look actually kind of weird for me to go like this and go like this at the same time. It looks kind of strange. People will get you, but they have to actually have to engage their conscious brain to figure out, wait, that's green, but it's an X? Okay, and you'll really confuse people if you do that. But there are other situations where, not that you get yourself into trouble, but there are different interpretations. So for example, I always like giving an interpretation of black versus red. So, for accounting or whatever, black represents positive numbers, and red represents negative numbers, if you have 2 colors. But I was giving this talk one time, and during halftime, someone came up to me and said, so I'm an electrical engineer. You're all laughing, and that's right. And that's all he had to say, because my dad was also an electrical engineer, is an electrical engineer. And so I'm like, all right, yeah, those go the other way around, don't they? And so once again, you get the check. So color is effective, right? Genuinely effective, genuinely useful, but now you're fumbling 2 markers in your hands. Always cap your markers. And it depends on the context. Color requires context. Also, a note about accessibility in that regard. Some people are colorblind. That's just true. There's a certain percentage of humanity that is colorblind. And especially red-green is a popular form of colorblindness. So that's not going to work. So you can't use only color to show something on the board, because people are going to look at it like, well, you draw 2 lines, what the hell does he mean? And so they'd be right. Instead, there are other combinations you can use. Purple and orange is a good one. Red and black, something and black, so you have contrast, also pretty good. But just keep in mind that if you can't remember any of the others, red and green is the big one. Red-green color blindness is kind of the most popular, and don't use red and green to convey information on their own for the sake of your audience. Also, always cap your markers. So, a couple of other pieces of advice. Whenever you're giving a talk, the phrase I learned for this was know 10 to teach 3. You have to know a little bit, basically you have to know about a little bit more 3 times about your topic in depth in order to teach it. Why is that true? Well, let's say you know a certain amount about your topic. You can do your job, you can, do a thing without getting hurt if it's a thing that you would get hurt by doing it wrong, etc. But to teach that same thing, you need to know a lot more. You need to know all the different ways you could hurt yourself. You need to know all the different details about what if things go wrong. You need to know the details about how to do things more efficiently that are earned through experience and that you can pass on to people. So if you imagine, you have experience, safety, historical knowledge. These are all things, don't wipe the floor with your hands. And so these are all things that require you to know like 3 times as much. This is not a scientific number, but 3 times as much to actually figure out what is going on. And so when you give a talk on a topic, start asking yourself, be that annoying guy in the audience, or whoever, right? Be that annoying person in the audience who's going to ask you about the nitpicky detail that you yourself were afraid of. That's a lot of work to figure out. Like, make sure they're asking you that all the time. Now, that can make you crazy. That can make you go completely nuts doing it. But remember, they're not, people in the audience who are asking you stuff that hit your blind spot is not because they don't like you. If they are sitting there listening to you, that is the biggest endorsement you need that they want to hear what you're saying, presuming voluntary interaction, right? But they don't think about it the same way you do. They're not going to have the same framework inside their head that you do. So they're going to poke at that one thing over there that you didn't even think to talk about. So, know 10 to teach 3. Make sure you are aware of the holes in your knowledge and fill them at least a little bit if you're going to give a talk on a subject. Because being able to get up to the front, somebody asks you something and you have to go, I don't know. Well, points for honesty. We'll get to that in a second too. But it's still going to be a problem because now you don't know. Why am I the expert on this? Because I'm on the one on stage. That's about it. That's really about it. I did the work, I figured out how to give this talk several times, and I'm up on stage giving this talk, and you are listening. That's what makes me the expert right now, and you are the expert until proven otherwise. The other thing is to choose your metaphors. Just a question that I want you to think about. How many ways can you describe the TCP 3-way handshake? Just in your head. Like, I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to think about this. Okay? 10, 9, 8. I'm going to keep talking for this next few seconds. Think about it for a second, because there's going to be a quiz in a second. How many ways can you explain, or ways that you can talk about the TCP 3-way handshake? Okay, time's up. Even give you a few extra. Raise your hand if it's one way. You know how to describe it one way. Oh, raise your hand if you know how to describe it at least one way. Raise your hand if you know how to describe it at least 2 ways. Okay, hands down. At least 3 ways. Okay, that's about normal, right? You could probably come up with a couple of ways. You can say it's like, well, it's packets, and there's the sin and this, and or you could say it's a conversation. You know, I've heard that one too, where people like, hey, I'm about to talk with you. Okay, you're about to talk with me. There's stuff like that. But you now have multiple. For those who only had one way, you now have 2. And once again, not everybody internalizes information the same way. If you can come up with multiple ways, multiple metaphors for how you can explain a topic, you want to. Because someone's going to ask questions and say, I'm sorry, I just don't get it. And you need them to get it. That's why they're here, and that's why you're here. So be able to say, you know, let me give you another one. And A, that shows your expertise on the topic. But B, they get to learn something, which is pretty great. Another thing along those lines is, and this is a little bit more salesy thing, but I know I had to do it. Time trials. Take a topic. Describe a technical concept in 2 minutes. Okay, great. Now do it in 1 minute. 30 seconds. 10 seconds. 1 sentence. How you would describe it to your colleague. How would you describe it to a non-technical friend? What would you employ to get that information into people's heads as economically as possible? The detail doesn't have to be exactly the same. It's not going to. But it gets you thinking about what's important and what's not. What doesn't actually matter? For example, as an example of the genius of realizing what doesn't actually matter. So, what doesn't actually matter? I'm sure you've all seen subway maps of some kind. You know, and it depends. Sometimes they're strictly geographical. Sometimes they're semi-geographical, like New York's, where it kind of vaguely follows the geography because it kind of has to. But then you have stuff like London's, where you have this, you know, this circle and the things going out the side and going that way and a couple of things up there, and the Metropolitan line goes the whole way out here, et cetera, et cetera. And the funny thing is, the distances are immaterial. Like, these 2 stops are maybe 50 meters from each other. But you wouldn't know it by the map. It just is. Now, that kind of subway map is called a Beck diagram, done by Henry Beck, back in the beginning of the London Underground. And the key point he made, the key point he understood is, when you are underground, it doesn't exactly matter where you are if you're in the subway. You're just getting to the next stop. And so, because he could discard distance, give or take, he could focus on the overall topology. And that made the subway map much easier to understand. So, think about that. When you're giving a description of something, what actually doesn't matter? Because that will allow you to toss things out that were not key to somebody retaining the information. And that's incredibly important too. So now we've talked about pictures. So now we're going to talk about words a little bit. Because words do matter. Words do mean things. Although what they mean can be flexible. And that's sensitive to context too, because we're talking about humans and language, and it all gets really mushy really fast. But vocabulary is important. These are the words that you use in your talk are the words that you will use to manipulate what you are talking about. Your words are your tools as well. Secret piece of knowledge. So, and the tricky part is, you've probably had a technical discussion with somebody, and they said, you mean, so it's like X, but for Y? And you go, no, it's nothing like that. You're not getting it. Did you listen to anything I said? It has nothing to do with X or Y. Let me start again. Because what mechanically happened there is they're trying to impose their own vocabulary on a construct that you have created to make it more tractable. And if you're trying to introduce a genuinely new concept, that might not actually be welcome. This is the reason you have to choose vocabulary. This is the reason that you have to actually talk about, there's a reason that the internet is a series of tubes actually stuck. Because you think, like, oh, I suppose maybe, okay, fine, what? But it's not a truck, right? That was the other thing Ted Stevens said. But what words, so I ask you this, what words, what vocabulary do you want them to leave the room with? What words do they have in their head as a result of you talking to them, and how do they associate them with the solution, topic, whatever, that you wanted to talk about? And one of the ways that you can anchor your talk when you start at the beginning is to talk about how, like, what are the concepts? What are the words? Not just the concepts I want to leave them with, but what are the words I want to leave them with? What is the new vocabulary or the new meanings to old vocabulary I want them to have in their head? And so think about that as well. You're defining the term, like, it actually helps to define your vocabulary. Like, when you're preparing your talk, what are the words you want to use to define your vocabulary? Why have I used the phrase Jedi mind trick? Because y'all know what it means, and you all have something in your head. Once again, there's leveraging things you know to tell you more about what I want to tell you about. We're going to take a brief break in a few minutes, so I'm going to finish up with something that's actually, like, this is the one bit of the talk where I actually have to get dead serious, because it is the most important thing. I used to say possibly, but that's not true. It is the most important thing I can teach you in this talk. And I'm going to teach you it, and I'm going to display mechanically how it works and why it's important. And you're not a bad person for messing it up, but that's why it's so important that you don't mess it up. Okay? Don't make stuff up. If I leave you with nothing else from this talk, if you don't walk around with anything else here, when you're giving a talk, like, it's fine, whatever, you're around friends, you're talking about whatever, I don't care. It's not that's not my problem, it's not my concern. But when you're communicating stuff to people up here, don't make stuff up, ever. Why? Well, let me run you through the mechanics of it, because I think this will describe it more than anything else. You're up there at the front of the room, you're giving a talk, let's say it's 15, 20 people in the room. So it's more kind of peers talking, you're doing your thing, you're presenting the subject on the thing that you've been working on, a specific technique to Frab Framistands, I don't care. Point is, you get asked a question, it's time for Q&A. You get asked a question. That question has a clear, obvious answer. You know it like the back of your hand. You say, hey, here's the answer. And that's great, gold star, 100%. But then comes the follow-on question. And this is something you know you looked at a couple of days ago, but you didn't put it down in your speaker notes because it's this weird edge case, and so you're only like, 19 out of 20% sure. Well, except for rolling a 1, you're okay. And you're feeling pretty good because you just answered a question off the top of your head like nothing's doing. Everything's like, wow, he's really smart. And so you answer that question too. You make your roll, comes up good. That's great. You answer that question correctly too. Good for you. And then comes the next one. And now this is something you haven't looked at in a couple of weeks. You're sure your eyes passed over it at some point, but you haven't looked at it in a couple of weeks. You're not 100% sure, but now you're buying your own press. You've just answered 2 questions. You feel like the expert in the room. You feel really good about it. And so maybe you got a 3 out of 4 shot. Those aren't really great odds. And you answer it too, because you're feeling pretty good about yourself, and you feel like, I must know this well, I knew the other things well too, because brains are weird. At best, okay, you got lucky, but I can tell you, question number 4 from another person in the audience, you're going to fail that roll. But also, let's say you fail. So at the best case of that, you're giving wrong information to people who trust you. They trust you because they're sitting there and you are up here and you just willfully gave them wrong information. At worst, well, you lose credibility with your audience, but you kind of knew that was going to happen. But the important thing is, humans talk about things. Humans talk about information. Not that you were a crappy speaker. That's besides the point. I hope that you're a better speaker than that. But they're going to pass on that wrong information. And as certain and as wrong as you were will be as certain and as wrong as they are. And you have now started a problem that snowballs, because now a whole bunch of people are working on different information, and trying to catch wrong information with right information takes about 10 times as much energy as doing it right in the first place. So don't make stuff up. There is one tiny, tiny exception that I have to address because people ask about it every single bloody time. If it is color commentary and what you're talking about, well, it was a Monday, or it was midday, right? This is not a factual thing. It's just you're trying to set a scene. Like, it happened midday. Midday I was going to the supermarket. If you're telling a story that means something completely else, does it really matter whether you're talking about whether it happened in the evening or the morning going to the supermarket, if it's just about being in the supermarket? Probably not. And the problem is that if you actually start bobbling it in your head, and you're like, Monday, no, it was evening. Was it morning? Now you're having a conversation with yourself up here while everybody's wondering, why is he talking to himself? And that's not great either. So yes, there's this teeny tiny little exception when it comes to color commentary in a story, and that's the only thing I'm going to give you. Otherwise, I'm pretty absolutist about it. Do not make stuff up. One last thing, brief word about parking lots. You can do stuff like, okay, I'm going to, hey, I don't know about that. I'll put that in the parking lot, and we'll talk about it later, and we'll write these things down. But putting things in a parking lot is a promise. You have promised that you are going to do the research, find the answer, and then report that answer back to somebody in a way that they can understand. That's a lot of work for one line on a board. But every line on the board represents that. There's no problem with tabling a specific piece of the conversation. There's no problem saying, hey, we'll get to that later. That's a really good point, but we'll get to it later. It's a little bit out of scope for this discussion. But on the flip side, realize how much work you're creating for yourself in the process. So, with that all said, we are now at halftime. I'm looking at the clock. says 39 minutes, 46 seconds left. We're going to start in about 5 minutes. So I want to give you 5 minutes to check your mail, do you think, get a drink, what have you, and we start again in exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. Sorry, what? Oh, look at those. How did those happen? Well, they're not chopped liver. They're chopped liver, I don't have crackers. That's a problem, right? They're not chopped liver, though. So anyway. Okay, we're going to start in about a minute. How many people here have done community theater before? Raise your hand. Any sort of theater or what have you, okay. So if I say we're starting in 1 minute, what is the response? It's thank you, one. It's a message passing algorithm. Someone runs into the back of the room, they say we're starting in 5 minutes, the person who hears them says thank you 5, everyone else in the room says thank you 5, and now everybody is synced. It's pretty cool. But it's also, this is how humans communicate. So If someone who's just going out of the room back there can call people back in, that would be amazing. Yeah, somebody's already gone out. So we're going to start in just a few minutes. Well, no, we're going to start like now. Y'all are here, and I said 5 minutes, and those other people, they can just catch up. So, let's talk about agendas. Agendas are magic. They are really magic. Now, why? They are a multi-purpose tool. So, first thing I'm going to tell you, you've probably heard this from many people, so you're just going to hear it again. Have an agenda, drive the agenda, stick to the agenda. Know what you want to talk about, stick to it, figure it out. Obviously, this doesn't work as well for like people who are doing sales engineering stuff because the customer asks them questions and you don't want to just get through your pitch come hell or high water. But in the case of where you're communicating specific technical information, have the agenda, stick to the agenda. Understand that there are things you wanted to communicate, and while you may get distracted by others and you bring yourself back, don't distract yourself. Also, Jedi mind trick time, agendas can be blamed. Now, what do I mean by this? So, agendas can be blamed. You know, you've got a lot to talk about. You genuinely, really have a lot to talk about. And you have to get to a whole bunch of points in the time allotted, and you get a hard stop, and there's nothing you can do. And they say, well, how about X? Like, hey, that's a great question, but there's a lot to cover here, as you can see by my agenda on the board. And suddenly, it's not you ignoring them. It's not you telling them they're not important. It's some, inanimate lines written on board by you 30 seconds ago that now mean that you don't have to directly address their question now so you can get your content done. This is just part of the game. Maybe you talk with them after. Maybe you say, hey, I'm sorry there was a lot to get through. Can you tell me your question again? That connection's important. That's fine. But for purposes of moving a talk along, because once you get distracted, you'll tend to stay distracted because you're going to go into a different mode. And in terms of modes, let's talk about modes. When I came into this room, well, actually, when I was standing up on stage, when y'all came into this room, how did I greet you? I said, good afternoon, all. Those are the exact words I use. I know because I wrote them down. But what did that mean? Like, good afternoon, all. I'm glad you came. Today is Whiteboarding 101. I'm Matt Ringel. We're going to talk about blah, 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 blah. Now, what did I do by doing that? I'm up here. I'm teaching a tutorial. You all are here listening. And we're going to have a discussion about this, and I'm the one who sets the rules. I'm mostly going to be talking, you're mostly going to be listening, and I'm the one who gets to set the rules. I realized we didn't have the halftime Q&A. We'll have more halftime Q&A at the end, I promise. So, at the end, being able to say, like, okay, good afternoon, we're going to do a thing, that's great. Now, you start at the beginning, and then everybody's kind of, it's like going into class and listening to the teacher say, okay, here we go, we got a lot to cover today. And suddenly, like, okay, I am here to listen. And that's great. That's an agentic state is the term for it, from agent. And that's a fine thing. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how okay, I am now in receive mode. But also, at the end, set closure. Say that the time of this period where there are these social norm rules in place is now ended. And you can go back to whatever else you're doing. And that could just be thank you all for coming, right? That could just be, hey, it was great talking with you guys, see you next year. Something. But the important, or then, have a good afternoon. You greet them as they go out the door. Setting the tone at the beginning with an invocation, setting the tone at the end with a closure is important. Just ask any spiritual leader. And now you're going to notice it. So and part of that is, this is the first bit about controlling the conversation. You really want to make sure that people are kind of on track. Part of that is saying, okay, we're starting now. And okay, we're ending now. Or now's the time for questions. Or la, 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 la. So let's talk about a couple of other things about controlling the conversation. You can defer questions because there's no shame in saying, I don't know. See before I said about don't make stuff up. There's no shame in it. There's no shame in saying, I didn't look at that, I can't give you an answer, and I don't want to give you a wrong answer. People will respect that. Now, obviously, you say it too much, they're like, why the hell are you up here? But in the general case, if it happens once or maybe even once or twice, nobody notices and they'll probably respect you for it. Don't be afraid of it. Parking lots are tricky, as I mentioned before, but they're necessary because there will be things that you want to handle later, if only for your own benefit. Hey, think about this. You get to talk, you get to be the expert, you get to do your thing, do your little show, et cetera, and you have a whole audience of people out there that you didn't pay, maybe, to tell you what the holes in your knowledge are. That's amazing. That's like the best thing ever. And that parking lot becomes your catalog of all the holes in your knowledge that you may not have even known you had. That is the important thing. And keep that in mind. That is a gift. That is incredibly valuable. And more importantly, this goes back to the sales engineering conversation, make sure people know that they've been heard. Make sure people feel that they have been heard. I went out in the audience and I talked to a few people during halftime. There's a reason for that, not just because I wanted to stretch my legs. I'm walking enough. People will know when they are not heard. People will have, in the back of their mind, this kind of half sense that they're just talking at me. They're not talking to me. And sometimes you may do that unintentionally. Sometimes you're really into your own talk and you do your thing. Note that one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm making eye contact with all of you, but I'm not, really. That would be impossible, mostly because I got lights in my eyes. But I'm making contact with about 5 of you. Making eye contact with about 5 of you in the audience. And those 5 people switch. But the idea is I'm looking over on the left, look in the middle, look on the right. And I shift between them. And as I shift between them, if I look in that direction and I look near enough to somebody, people will say, they're looking at me, and that's great. But the important thing is yes, that's true, but what's the important thing is that you're getting a reading on the audience. You can basically choose 3 proxies. On the left, if the person on the left is smiling, the left section is probably smiling. If the middle section is bored, if one person in the middle section is bored, they're probably all bored. And this person over here is really, really angry, they're probably not happy with me. But it gives you a sense, and by switching up, you can keep proving this to yourself. And so that's constant feedback during the talk. And since human hardware is pretty good at reading reading faces most of the time, that gives you a very, very efficient way to go through, to just kind of chase the mood of the crowd and figure out what's going on. In modern days, this also helps. You can look at somebody on their laptop. Look, there's a work conference. People are doing work. If they're futzing on their phone, you can tell there's between someone intently typing something and someone going, you can tell. And don't tell me you can't. But there are times when you have where the discussion kind of gets a little bit off track, and you've kind of lost the audience. So how do you bring them back? What does it mean to bring them back? And so one thing to think about is that during a talk, any talk, especially a talk in a big dark room like this, people are going to look at each other and discuss things with each other. And that's mostly for humans to just sync up their hardware with each other. It's like, did he say what I think he said? Yeah, he did. Okay. Oh, what are you saying when he did that? Oh, he said that thing. Okay, great. Cool. As long as it's, a tiny little side conversation, it's kind of quiet, nobody can hear anything, let it slide. It's not about you, I promise. But if there's more than one, start paying attention. If there's a bunch, nobody's looking at you. And in that case, it's okay to say, everybody, look, this is a really important conversation. You all came here for a reason. I want to teach you. Can you please come back? Firmness is not rudeness. They came here for a reason, and you are here for a reason too. You get to stand up for yourself, and you get to say, come back. Look, I know it's the afternoon, y'all had too much sweet tea, you're falling over right now, whatever, right? But don't anybody feel looked at. This was not personal. But the point is that at some point, you have to bring people back. And it's okay to forgive them for it. It's like, look, I get it. It's been a long day. This is the last session of the day. This is, in fact, the last session of the day. But please come back. There's more to talk about, and I think you're going to like it. So one of the other things is, you've noticed I pulled the audience a few times. Well, that's a way to get the pulse of the audience, and a way to actually connect with them. How many people did community theater? Like, how many people know a way to talk about TCP, et cetera, et cetera. This is a thing that's going to happen. And so you need to know what your audience is, and there's a quick way of getting little bits of information about them that's actually very important. Also, it knows that they've been understood. It shows that you care about them. It shows that you're shaping the talk towards them. And you are, right? Because, that's a good thing to do. And you do it enough to confirm that people are following, but not enough so that you're annoying them, because, is he really insecure about this? Is there a problem? Is it cool? I mean, this is kind of awkward. So it's a way to check in with people. It's also a convenient way to keep people off their phones, because they have to pay attention in a way that doesn't single out any one person. This is also why I told you, feel free to look at your phones and do whatever you want to do during halftime. Because while there are some of y'all who have to do work and it involves your phones, and that's fine, less of you will do it if I give you a specific time when you can. That goes for fifth graders too, by the way. So, let's talk about how speakers mess up. Yeah, we're doing okay on time. Let's talk about how speakers mess up. The standard geek pitfalls. So, first we'll talk about throwing knowledge. What do I mean by throwing knowledge? Oh, you'll get it in a second. What if I say, hey, I'm at the front of the room, I've kind of gotten off into the weeds, I really don't know what I'm talking about, but I know a lot about this subject, so I'm just going to keep throwing information at people in an unordered fashion, and hopefully they won't notice that I didn't do my homework. Has anybody in here in this room not done that? Raise their hand. This doesn't apply to the one of you, but I'm skeptical. The thing about throwing knowledge is that it's good for friends over your favorite beverage, right? But it's bad for your audience. It raises the risk that you will break out of whatever layer of abstraction you're in. And more important, you are the expert in here until proven otherwise. And if you're throwing up a smokescreen, which is in fact what you're doing, by the way, when you start throwing knowledge at people, they're going to have doubts about whether you are actually the expert in the room, and that's a problem. Another thing that happens is taking it personally. This is just a thing, right? People do this, especially if you have a lot of knowledge, you know a lot about a subject, part of your identity is bound up in the knowledge and how you're able to learn. That's just also a thing that happens. and someone tells you something, and it can't even be them saying, by the way, you're wrong, although it could be. But it could also be just, I don't think that's the way it works. I think you got those two things reversed or what have you. And in that moment, you want to defend yourself. In that moment, you want to actually say, no, that's not true. But what you can do instead is just take a second. Let the back of your brain process it for a second, like just a second, nothing that anybody's going to notice, and realize they asked a question to the person on stage. They didn't ask the question to you. They didn't try to impugn your knowledge. We are kind of in an artificial setting right now where I have limited the topic of discussion. And so we will talk about this specific thing, and you will say, that's really interesting, I'd like to talk with you about that later. And then you do. Once again, the audience can point out blind spots in your knowledge, and that's pretty great. And then the last one, getting bogged down in questions. Because if you start taking questions, if you take questions in the middle of a talk, they can start diverting the talk. Because now you're answering people's questions, and you've gone from the mode of listening and receiving to interactive questions. And you'll find this when a person gets up to the mic, and this happens at any conference, including this one, where someone gets up to the mic and then feels by the fact they're up at the mic and asked a question, they are entitled to as many follow-on questions as they want, and that they're in a conversation with the person up on stage. They might not even notice that they're doing it. But I can promise you everybody else does. I may have elbowed people who were sitting next to me who were doing that. This is just it's a thing, and it has to be stopped. And if you're on stage, you're the one who gets to say, hey, there's a lot of other people who want to ask questions too. Don't make it about you. There's a lot of other people on stage, a lot of people who want to ask questions too. I want to give the audience the opportunity to ask other questions. Thank you for your time. We'll talk. Thank you for your time. We can talk about this later. There are many other unpleasant things you could say to them, but that's the ones you say. So what I want to get to now, because I want to make sure there's enough time for Q&A. This is the last unit, by the way. Is dealing with problem audience members. Who they are, what they do, and how to deal with them. So, problem audience members. And it's typically not problem audiences. It's always typically problem audience members. So, first type is the sniper. The sniper is just person sitting in the audience. They're always ready with a side comment, like to the people to the next to them or what have you. They want to be the comedian. They want to, basically have this real-time reaction video to the people near them saying, yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or yeah, that's not the whatever. So they're always ready with a side comment, but they're never ready to participate. They hardly ever have discussion. They hardly ever have questions during Q&A. It just doesn't happen. That's not how they want to participate, and that's not how they can participate. They're making commentary to neighbors, and they're not particularly whispering either. And you'll hear it every now and then. You'll hear somebody make a side comment, and you just pay attention if it's one person. So, or even if it's IM, someone will type something on the screen and then show it to others, like, hey, look at this thing I typed, what have you. And you'll see it, and there'll be a rhythm to it, and you'll just detect it. If it's not distracting, fine, whatever, who cares? But if it is, the solution is inclusion. Include them in the discussion whether they like it or not. You see them talking, you say, hey, like, shh, poof, you over there. You over there in the corner. Yeah. Red shirt. Yeah, right, that one, right there. You've been making commentary. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Would you like to share with the rest of the class? I'm not particularly kind about it. But the thing is, as soon as you say, hey, you, come up, what do you want to talk about? And at that moment, they get all the attention they never wanted. And they will typically just slink back into their seat, like really just slink back. Like, I don't know what slinking looks like, but they totally do it. Back into their seat, and they just won't do it for the rest of the time because they are genuinely embarrassed that, oh, I thought nobody saw what I was doing. Like, you're sitting in the middle of the audience and you're talking with people, and I can hear you from up here. Are you kidding me? Come on. But this happens. Do you have something to add? Would you like to share with the class? 5th grade teachers know this one too, right? The next one is the bully. So you say something, and they have a mimetic immune response. That can't possibly be right. I can't believe that's right. That's a horrible. They might even like stand up and huff out or like say, that's wrong, you're lying, and then run out. If they run out, they're not your problem anymore. That's great. But if they don't, they must, they feel that you have just said something horribly wrong and you must be corrected, and they must be right at all costs because, well, now they've committed, now haven't they? They've committed to looking like an idiot if they're wrong. So they cannot possibly be wrong. And they believe in their heart of hearts that, are you showing something on your phone? You believe in your heart of hearts that, that the rest of the audience thinks this too, and you're just bringing this truth to light. And the answer is that's hardly ever true. The solution? Isolate. Do not escalate. Because escalation is what the bully wants. They want to fight. If instead they say something and say, sir, this is a Wendy's. No, you say, sir, this is a talk on whiteboarding. These are the things we've talked about here. If you'd like to have a talk, please hold it for the Q&A. You start with please. And then, if they're at the mic saying something, then you signal over there to have them cut the mic. But realistically speaking, isolate. They are alone. No bully functions alone if they think they're the only one who feels this way. If you isolate it, they will eventually, if it was really just an immune response, they will kind of come back down and they'll say, oh, no, I see what you're getting at now, and they'll sit back down. And you've kind of diffused it, which is what you wanted to do in the first place. So there are two more. There's the status seeker, which is to say the person who wants to look like they're the smartest person in the room, and therefore during they ask questions, they don't want an answer to the question. They want to play stump the chump with whoever's on stage. And they want to show that they're the person in the room. They want to show their peers, who are probably sitting near them, that they are the smartest person in the room. Now, if you get one of these, people, the answer really is to recognize them, acknowledge they exist, because this way they get acknowledged as status, and then defer their question. Like, hey, I hear you. That's a really great question, and there's a really good answer for that, but it's not going to fit in the rest of the Q&A. I'd like to hear other questions. Let's talk about it later. You have now noticed them, which fulfills a little status thing in their mind, and now you've deferred it, and they probably won't even be waiting outside to ask you about it because they got what they wanted out of it. And now, last but not least, one of my favorites, actually my favorite, is the nakmok. That's my Klingon speaking. Yeah? Well, one second. So the idea is, we'll get to Q&A in about 1 minute, okay? Nakmok, which is, I think it was author John Scalzi, originally came up with this term. Stands for not a question, more of a comment. Now, yes, there are people who, they're amateurs who get up to the mic and they say, You know, there's not a question, there's more of a comment, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't always come in that form, because people get better at it over time, or worse, as the case may be. Like, this isn't a question, but blah, 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 blah. Would the panel/speaker agree that blah, 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 blah? I was wondering if blah, 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 because what comes next doesn't matter. It is a waste of time. It is an utter waste of time. And let me tell you why. Because you are the one up here. And why are you the one up here? Because you did the work. I know it feels bad sometimes to cut people off, but you're the one who did the work. You submitted the paper, you submitted the slides, you talked with the shepherds, you got the talk done, you came up here, and, you know, I kind of like public speaking. There's a lot of people who don't. And then you made it and you risked it to get up in front of the public and give a talk, and they did not. They want to have all the benefits of being up here without any of the cost. So screw them, really. The solution to that question is cut them off. There's nothing to be gained any other way. Say, no, this is for questions. A question must be a question, and it can't be a sentence, it can't be a statement with a question mark at the end. Or if they get really into it, motion to have them cut the mic. There's nothing to be gained either way. So with that being said, that was the talk. Thank you very, very much for coming. And I hope you learned something about this. And so now we're going to have some Q&A. So if you'd like to stand up to the mic and ask questions, I will be more than happy to answer any questions you may have on the topic of giving a presentation. Anybody? Are there no questions from the audience? No questions from the chat? No, there's nothing to be sorry about. That just means I get to teach you one more thing. I have this one in the back pocket just in case. I did, I promise. How many people here would say, you know, raise your hand, are you a particularly good artist? Like, raise your hand if you are. Like, you can draw really well, like freehand, draw really well. So practically nobody, give or take. There's one mezza. All right, so this applies to all of you, then. When you are at a whiteboard, the only things you get to draw, I'm telling you this, are circle, squares, triangles, and lines. Those are the only things that you are really, really going to get. Now, that's flexible. An oval is a, changed circle. A rectangle is a changed square. Lines can cross and become graphs and tables and other stuff. But those are the only primitives you get. That's all you have. Anything else? I'm going to draw an octagon on the board. Wait, that's too many sides. Or not enough sides, right? Humans just aren't good at it unless you've practiced. If you've practiced, okay, fine, maybe, but then you've got another problem. If you've practiced, like, hey, I'm going to use all these different shapes, well, now you're hitting short-term memory. Anybody know the term 7 plus or minus 2? 7 plus or minus 2 represents the amount of chunks you have in short-term memory that you can hold at any given time, depending upon what the thing is. If you have more than 5 different things that mean different things, you're now performing a stack smashing attempt on your audience. Please don't do that. It is not very nice. And it also, like, you can't get your point across. You're like, wait, what did the Pentagon, what did the Pac-Man mean again? I don't know. And just don't do it. So keep your drawing simple, and that ties into what doesn't matter. So for example, if I'm drawing, a backbone map of a place with stuff, maybe I have 5 different links between those 2 locations. Do I need to draw all 5 lines? No, I do not. Because they don't matter. The point is to show the connectivity. Do I need to say, hey, there are actually 18 switches here. Do I need to draw 18 separate circles? No, I do not. I draw one circle, say there's 18 of them, and there's that, and people will figure out what's going on. Similarly, so what doesn't matter? So that's a bonus bit of this talk that I just came up with today. I'd like to thank you all for coming. And with 4 minutes and 40 seconds left, I'm going to give you one more chance. Any questions? Hearing none, thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you for coming.